Welcome back. So, your husband or wife has said they want separation or divorce, or they remain emotionally checked out. I had already spent about the last 10 years studying self development material, like I was studying, like I knew this stuff like the back of my hands when my own marriage collapsed. You see, think about the ego, not ego, but the ego hit to my ego at that point in time. Literally, I felt powerless. I was making three terrible mistakes, and I want to review to you in this cycle we're about to unpack right now. We call it the proof cycle. All right, the proof cycle. We're going to call it the proof cycle, which is triggered by such powerlessness, if you will, right? The proof cycle, right? So again, they've asked you for divorce, or maybe you're not even sure where they are right now, and you've made some changes, some crazy changes. You've discovered yourself. You're doing self-discovery. You're doing all this work, but you still feel powerless. So today we're going to unpack this cycle. All right. So think about powerlessness, whatever that means to you in this state of your marriage right now, right? So from powerlessness, what do we have? Now you find the need to start proving yourself. You start to do explanations, things like that, right? So you start proving yourself. Let's put that on the board real quick, because we're going to unpack this together tonight. Right? So every effort you put into proving yourself becomes pressure. Right? Pressure on the other side. Even though that's not the intentions, right? So now from pressure, what do we have? Hold on one second. From pressure, you're creating resistance. Well, they resist, right? They resist. Like instead of attraction, you're getting resistance. All right. And every time you experience such resistance, it creates, what do we call it? We create doubt. Okay, and doubt makes you feel even more powerless. All right, this is the cycle that you're probably stuck in right now. We're going to unpack this tonight or in this video, and you may think, if my husband or if my wife could finally understand how much I've changed, how much work I've done on myself, they would finally reconsider the divorce. Well, that's the trap. And the fastest way to make real change and still get stuck in powerlessness is to need your husband or wife to believe it right now. So everyone's story is different. If you want my help personally, you want me to help you personally understand the specific stage in your marriage crisis right now, you want to go to getmymarriageback.com/discovery and book a private discovery session. But whether you ever book a session or not, you need to understand what happens next in this cycle, because there are 3 terrible mistakes that I made, and I'm going to help you avoid making the same mistake, because the moment you start proving your change is the moment your good intentions becomes pressure. All right, so let's get into that. Tonight we're talking about your partner wants divorce, and there are 3 mistakes. Matter of fact, this is 3 mistakes that you change. Let me adjust that real quick. It's 3 mistakes I'm going to be sharing with you that you change, that makes your change. All right, so we might have to correct some of the titles there. That's fine. All right, bottom line is that it's not working. You feel powerless. Okay, so there are 3 terrible mistakes that I made that you are probably making. Let me just put 3 terrible mistakes. All right. Welcome back. So first of all, let's talk about powerlessness, right? That state of powerlessness, despite your changes, all the different changes you've been making, Your wife still says, you never do that. You always say this. You're only doing this because I want a divorce. This was my story. Okay. I heard the always, I heard the never, which is generally not accurate. The word always or never is never really accurate, but that's just how they feel. It's valid, right? This is where they are. This is what they are feeling, right? You're only doing this because I want divorce. So they really just don't believe you, or they're not even, it's completely subconscious, right? Bottom line is that they are checked out, right? And sometimes she doesn't say anything, like your partner is not saying anything, and you'll be working on yourself. And of course, they remain cold. And that produces a brutal internal experience that makes you doubt not just yourself, but everything you've ever believed in, because you want something that you cannot directly control, right? You want them to see the change you've been making, right? And every time you point it out, it's like it's not authentic, because the idea is that you want them to actually see it themselves, that you've been making these changes, right? And you want them to decide against the divorce. You want them to reconsider, right? And that's where the temptation begins, right? You confuse influence with control, right? It's a lot of this is happening because, again, you're trying to get them to see that you've changed, but it's not happening fast enough, right? And you have the power to influence your future experiences through how you show up, right? But how long are you going to be waiting for is the question here. But it seems like it never really shows up fast enough, right? Is that so? The temptation creeps in. You start, like, maybe I should call it out. Like, every time you call that out, it comes off as condescending, right? Yeah, it comes off as, it's weird, it's awkward, like awkward energy, right? You can't reach into another person to see it, but that's actively what you would like to happen. You want them to see that you've made changes because you desperately want to save the marriage. Inside the book, we repeatedly talked about bringing the attention back to yourself, mastering your own behavior, right? So, but at what point does it cross the line into now you feel the need to prove, right? That's why we're at the stage, the proving stage. At what point do you dangerously cross the line into feeling the need to prove yourself, right? At what point does powerlessness translate to now you're actively seeking validation? Like, you might not say it out loud, but it starts to show in your behavior. And this is mistake number one. You start explaining your change. Let me put that on the board. Okay. Mistake number one that you're probably going to make, or you're making already, rather. All right. Start explaining the change. Explaining what? No one is chasing me. The change. No one's chasing me. You start explaining the change, right? The proving, right? Because subconsciously you're thinking, if I just, this was me, right? I'm thinking, if I just explain my growth clearly enough, well, I'm not thinking it, but I get to a stage where I desperately need them to see the change, right? So if you just explain the growth, and it's clear, right? It's communication, right? That my wife will finally believe it, right? Yeah, not, right? That's not how it works, right? It actually gets worse from that point on. Because what happens is that you explain it and you still don't get the results, so you even feel worse than the powerlessness, right? You're trying to prove, like, you're logically, you're thinking, if I just do this, I would get this. But common sense will tell you, like, hey, if you just communicate, right? Eventually, what does that translate to? It puts you in a position where you're saying, why can't we just communicate, right? And they're looking like you crazy. Like, what do you mean communicate? I've been communicating. You didn't listen for so long, right? This was my story, guys. Okay? Because now the transformation that you've had is now turning into an argument, right? Every skeptical response then tempts you to even give more evidence, right? Evidence in the form of explanation. By the way, the explanation is coming off as complaining on the other side. You're explaining, but it's really they're interpreting you as you're complaining, right? And this is typically what happens all the time, right? All of this is happening subconsciously. Before you know it, you're already like 3 days deep into it before you realize that, ouch, I made the mistake. You keep explaining your change. And for me personally, like I told you earlier, I spent years studying self-development, yet intellectual knowledge still backfired when it was directed at my wife, Lola, right? And instead of embodying it, I often got to a point where I wanted to explain it because I needed like you at least validate the changes I've made, right? And oftentimes it's not just me talking, it's just it shows in the behavior because again, word of affirmation is also my love language. So honestly, it would be helpful to hear some kind of appreciation, right? But all of that translates into basically transform my transformations into just another opportunity for arguments. Okay, so this is something you want to watch out for. This is many people's idea of logic, but oftentimes it's just your emotions still playing tricks on you underneath. All right, so now we're dealing with, on the other side, you're dealing with pressure. They're receiving you as pressure. Remember, you're explaining. I mean, you probably won't admit it's explaining, but they're receiving you ultimately as you're complaining. It's pressure. Okay, that is pressure. They're receiving you as extreme pressure, as in like not comfortable, as in like they don't get to make their own decision, as in they checked out. They really want to come back to a place where they fall in love with you again and fix the marriage. Oftentimes that's the case, but they can't find themselves there because it feels like they're under pressure to make a decision way too soon. To you, like it's way too late. Why are we spending this time in this marriage if it's not working, right? So pressure does not always sound aggressive because obviously that's not your intentions, right? Pressure can sound extremely and incredibly reasonable. That's the trick. That's the trap. So what do you think about us now? Things like that, right? Do you see the difference? You're not saying it out necessarily, but it's showing it's like, hello, look at me, I'm changed, right? Because you're tracking, you're monitoring, you're obsessively acting a little weird and funny around them. They can tell that you're not being yourself. They can tell that you're trying to win them back, which again, ordinarily, nothing should be wrong with that. But again, you need to understand how attraction works here, right? Attraction is not something you just press a button and it comes back on. Attraction is the result of a certain type of process. Lack thereof is the result of a certain type of way that you've been moving, how you've been carrying yourself. Okay, so you wonder, you're still wondering if they're still planning to file the paperwork for divorce, right? Yeah. Sometimes you just outrightly, you actually verbalize it, you actually say it out. Don't you think we should consider ourselves, give ourselves another chance? Don't you reconsider this? Can we revisit counseling, right? You start asking all these questions. You're making the changes, and it's been, and to be fair to you, it's been like 3 months, and you feel like there should have been some kind of turnaround, some transformation in your marriage, right? Yeah. What happens? You encounter resistance. Typically, you get hit with resistance. Yeah. Again, this is something I've gone through. So not only have I gone through it, a ton of our students, our clients have gone through. This is exactly what they're struggling with. People that have determined they don't want to deal with a cheater, they don't fall in this category, right? Clearly, they figure life out. They just move on, right? But the majority of the rest of the people, when they signed up for marriage, they really wanted to do it for a lifetime. So at best, what they have is confusion and not like this clarity. Okay. So, and that's some of the things that will work with you. But anyway, resistance. Now you're faced with it. Now something interesting happens, right? The harder you work to establish that you're a different person, the more your partner actually protect their present state. Because for some weird reason, they feel safer in that state than giving you the chance to hurt them ever again. I know you don't agree that you've hurt them. Maybe, maybe not, right? But it's actually irrelevant. Bottom line is that you want to save the marriage, right? So why is it that the harder you work, the more it's working against you? Well, it's not necessarily because they're wicked, right? It's not necessarily because they're wicked. In fact, a long time ago, when I was going through this stuff years ago, one of the teachings that I stumbled into was TD Jakes' teaching on the difference between wickedness and weakness, right? Now, to the lame mind, they see you calling it a weakness, giving the other person an excuse, right? But then they don't see the other side of what does if you think of it as wickedness, what does that initiate inside of you in terms of your next point of action? It's not really about the other person. The interpretations you give to events of life will determine your next move. It's really always about you and never about anybody else. But of course, when you're obsessed, when you're rejected, when you feel rejection, you feel it breeds obsession, right? So you're looking for anyhow, any way to basically self-destruct even more, even if it looks on the surface like you're protecting yourself. Anyway, that's beside the point. The point I'm making here is that you're getting this resistance not because they are being wicked. That's not the reason, okay? They may be afraid. They may have seen temporary change somewhere before in the past that didn't last long enough. Maybe you keep repeating the same. You've made like 20 apologies on the same issues in the past. You didn't pay attention to it. After all, there's nothing wrong with apologies in a marriage. That's the common sense idea you came up with. You forgot that the more apologies you give, especially when it's not backed up with change, you forget that the more, right, the less value your apology actually carries. Right? The more, like, it's just basic economy principles. More supply, less value, right? Oh, you never thought about it that way. No, it's anything in life. If it's readily available, it reduces value, it gets taken for granted. The same thing with apologies, right? Maybe they've gone through those kind of stuff with you in the past and they don't yet feel safe. It's taking longer than you think because you're not in their shoes. So yes, they may be afraid. They may have seen temporary changes in the past that didn't last, right? And yes, they may still be carrying resentment, right? In my own story, my wife was carrying resentment worth 5 to 8 years by the time everything collapsed, right? So imagine, it's like, oh, like, of course I needed her to forgive me, like right now, because I made a change. But that's not the reality of things, right? Now, everybody's story is different, like I've been telling you, right? In fact, we had a client who was she could recognize that the husband is making changes, even spiritually, even from a behavioral standpoint, but she just couldn't help herself. She had to be conscious, and she felt conflicted oftentimes. Okay, but anyway, with what I'm about to show with you, things get more easier. But I want to show you mistake number 3. Mistake number 2 now. Mistake number 2. Mistake number 2 is that their skepticism, right? So they're skeptical, right? Of course they're skeptical, possibly rightfully so, right? The skepticism determines whether you think you're progressing or not, right? I'm going to make it simple. The skepticism determines how you measure progress. How you measure progress. This was a mistake I was making. That would be mistake number 2, right? So again, subconsciously you're thinking, if my husband wants divorce, right, my change is not working, right? If they still want divorce right now, if they're still checked out, it's just not working, right? Of course, that's not the reality. Okay, now I understand why you feel that same way, because I felt that same way. Sometimes they're warm today, and then you feel powerful. Tomorrow they're cold, and then suddenly you feel like you quit. You quit on the process altogether. You quit. Sometimes you quit prematurely, or sometimes you overreact, right? And you abandon the process. You abandon your self-leadership, and that's something we call emotional outsourcing. Basically, their behavior, their skepticism is what's determining what you consider to be progress. Okay, so, and the reality is not the reality the way it should be. I'm going to show you. But if you are making this mistake, it's going to make you react in a certain way. It's going to determine your next move. And what is this next move? You doubt Okay, you start creating doubt in your mind. Okay, the resistance creates doubt because you're measuring progress based on their skepticism. It creates doubt in your mind. Okay, and if you have all this doubt, if you're now doubting the process, you slow down on your self-work. You slow down on things that honestly you're not really doing for them, you're doing for yourself. You slow down, right? So now you start questioning the entire process. Why am I doing this if she doesn't care? Right? Why should I be the only one putting all the effort? In this stage, it's easy to yield to the common sense based generic advice you get all over the internet, where they tell you that a relationship cannot work with one-sided effort. Yes, that's true, but you can actually weaponize that against yourself. Okay, you can actually weaponize some of these true talking points against yourself, because basically what is basically unrealistic expectations. You're looking for the result before you do the work. We call it give and take, right? Relationship is give and take. That's the result. That's what a healthy relationship looks like, not when you're trying to save the marriage. If you're trying to save the marriage and you're going to wait for give and take before you actually work on the marriage, you're going to lose your way. This is true with anything worthwhile in life. You have to give first, and that is a process, because before it looks like give and take. All right, I'm sure we're clear on that. So you start asking questions like, why should you work on yourself if the other person is leaving, right? Imagine that question. Doesn't make any sense, right? Why are you giving space if nothing is changing? Like, you might as well just assert, hold your foot, put your foot down and say, hey, you either make us fix this marriage or you just leave my house right now. The question is, how's that working out for you? Right? Or you get to a stage where maybe I should send one more message, right? Because you feel like the time, the space is not working. So let me send one more message. Maybe they will just snap back into forgiving you immediately right now. How's that working out? Probably not so good, right? Right? So again, if your growth collapses when your partner doesn't reward it, your growth, if it collapses every time your partner is now rewarding it, yeah, your growth is basically attached to controlling behavior. Okay, that's when you start exhibiting or exuding controlling behavior. It's not tangibles. It's just the way it's your energy. It shows in your energy. You basically require them. You start requiring them to show up a certain way before you can work on your own growth. That's an oxymoron. It's probably why you're frustrated right now. That's why you feel powerless, because your powerlessness is attached to how they show up. And the reality is that you cannot control them. But let me guess, you're going to attempt it indirectly, subtly, somehow, some way. Exactly. It's not going to work. Okay. So now I want to talk about mistake number 3. Mistake number 3. All the mistakes are in the cycle you're looking at. If your entire self-improvement project exists to save the marriage, this was the mistake I was making, because I turned all the self-development work I was doing, I was turning into trying to save the marriage. If all your self-improvement work is all about your marriage, that's the biggest mistake you can make. Right? Self-development work, I'll put that here, equals to saving the marriage. But wait, that's exactly what I'm trying to do, right? I know. Let's talk about it. Saving the marriage. Right? If all of your self-development work basically revolves around, if it's only existing just because you want to save the marriage, right? In your subconsciously, you're thinking, if this doesn't get my husband or my wife back, none of it is worth it. If that's your mindset, right? Every workout, every book, every coaching session, counseling session, the karma conversation sound a little bit more feminine, the better parenting decision, if you're doing all of that, right? And it's secretly for one assignment, which is to save, is to get them back, right? yeah, it's going to backfire because that's not sexy. Oh my God, that lacks all kind of, yeah, that's not okay. That's not okay. All right. Right. This is supposed to be about your personal power, but basically it's become about the marriage. Now, a marriage, a good marriage, a healthy marriage is a function of your better self. That's what it comes down to. And if you don't get that, if you're making the same mistake, yes, you're going to basically circle around the circle back, right back to powerlessness. And this time it's going to be more intense. For every time you circle around the powerlessness and you go back into proving yourself, every time you go around that cycle, things just get worse. It gets worse, it gets worse and worse. And it gets harder to actually fix the marriage. Which, by the way, it shouldn't be about, don't tell them, it shouldn't be about fixing the marriage. It's about fixing yourself so that your capacity can actually attract the kind of marriage you're looking for. Right? So now in this place of powerlessness, now you feel even worse, right? Because before, right, you were powerless because your marriage was in crisis. But now you're powerless and frustrated because you've been doing the work and still don't have the outcome. So what do? You prove harder, more pressure, more resistance, more doubt, of course. And the proof cycle continues just like that. Okay. And honestly, after all those years, the earlier years of our marriage, I still had that missing piece. And sometimes she would straight up tell me that stop being my therapist. Like I knew the theoretical stuff. That's seems I'm very good at it now, but at that time it was just theoretical, right? She would literally say, stop being my therapist. So if your growth needs their approval to feel real, their skepticism still controls you. And that's why you're pushing back with all types of controlling behavior. So at this point, you may recognize yourself in one or all three of the mistakes that I've described here. Maybe you keep explaining your change. Maybe her skepticism determines whether you have a good day, and that could mean his skepticism too. Maybe you're dealing with a husband, right? Maybe your whole self-development process has quietly become a campaign to get your marriage back. I know that's kind of like the marketing message. That's what got you here. But I'm telling you that the root issue is not the marriage. Because marriage by itself, if you are solid, if you know what you're doing, marriage is good, right? If you don't know what you're doing, marriage is nasty, and you will basically blame it on marriage. You will call marriage a scam. And this is also where everybody's circumstances matter, right? The right implementation changes depending on whether you separated, maybe you're still living together, you're dealing with an affair. It's different case by case by case. Maybe you're already facing divorce papers that's already filed. Maybe you're stuck having to co-parent with somebody that doesn't even like you, and you really want them back. You want the marriage back, right? And maybe you still receive occasional warmth here and there, mixed with rejection, defensiveness on your part, apologizing 20 gazillion times with all the defensiveness in it, right? If you want me to help you apply these principles that we're sharing with you to your actual marriage, just go to getmymarriageback.com/discovery. getmymarriageback.com/discovery. Book a private discovery session. And now with what do you see that all three mistakes have in common? All of these three mistakes, what do you see that they all have in common, right? Your attention keeps escaping you. They keep leaving you, and it goes to, does she believe me? Does he believe me? Is it working? Do they notice my changes, right? Is this working? Is the divorce still happening, right? You have all this doubt, uncertainty about the future of your marriage, right? You're living in panic every other day, right? Did I impress her? Right? Did he finally see the new me? So you're that's something you notice that all three mistakes have in common. Is basically, if you cannot remove powerlessness by controlling the other person, right, or their interpretation of you, right, What exactly are you supposed to do when powerlessness shows up and it continues to circle around each other again? And that's why I want to share this second operating system with you. And we're going to call this, what should we call this? We're going to call this, let's see. Let me pull this up real quick. Okay, so what do we want here, right? We want let's see. Let's just call it a cycle. I got stuck calling it a name right there. Let's just call it the cycle. Okay, the prestige cycle rather. Right? It's one of the prestige cycles. So let's just call it the prestige cycle. And the prestige cycle is still triggered by powerlessness. It's no different. It's just life. Life will throw you curveballs every now and then. It's just life. It is what it is. Right? Life will throw you a curveball all the time. So nothing changed. It's just you changed. You become better. You have better capacity, right? So from powerlessness, though, you know, with the prestige cycle, you know to go to the first core pillar, the grounding. Why? Why are we going towards grounding? Well, the first move is not proving like it was before. You don't have to prove yourself. Listen, you see what I just did? Confidence is sexy. Brush your shoulders off. You don't have to prove yourself. Your work should prove itself. If the work is not proving itself, the work needs to keep going until it proves itself. Your first move is grounding, because what I just said is easier said than done, especially when you don't have grounding, right? Without grounding, your subconscious goes to, I need my husband, I need my wife to change their mind so I can feel okay. You see, your happiness, your stability depends on the other person, right? But grounding means you're creating enough internal space between what happened, like life events, and what you do next. How do you do that? You have to give life events the right interpretations, because if you don't give it the right interpretations, you're going to continue to make moves that's dependent on what they do. And if you do that, that's why you feel powerless, right? So yes, your wife can still say, I still want divorce, but grounding does not mean you pretend that that's not what they said, right? That doesn't hurt. That's not what it means. It doesn't mean you pretend. It means you don't immediately turn that pain into a presentation. In fact, that's not what, there is pain, and pain, believe it or not. You're going to find it very useful, right? But wait, before we get there, you breathe, right? You gain perspective. This is grounding, okay? Grounding, you're finding footing. Obviously, something is shaking your world up. Something is sending shock waves of panic through your system and fear. You're just being a normal human being, but you're not acting on that. You're not complaining, explaining, getting defensive, apologizing, trying to prove yourself, trying to show up a different way. You know, you're not, if you do anything at all, you're doing it for self, so that you can become a better version of yourself, which is why I said you breathe, right? You have to breathe. You gain perspective. You return back to gratitude, because oftentimes you're a blessed person who's probably lost sight of that because your partner said they don't want to be in a marriage with you, right? So now you need to return back to gratitude of what remains in your life at this point in time. Things you can be grateful for. Can you name 3 things? Maybe just 2, maybe 4, right? So you remember your higher self, the version of you capable of making an intentional decision instead of a panic reaction, right? If prayer is part of your world, you get into prayer. If you have a God, you engage that. You engage principles that represent your higher self. And if walking helps, you think, you walk. You're doing whatever you need to do to maintain your centeredness, something that helps you improve yourself. And oftentimes, it's just a good 30 seconds. Breathe. Don't react, right? Sometimes it's something just that simple, right? So from grounding, if you're able to do this successfully, now you're able to move, you're able to flip pain into purpose. Remember, we're not saying that you don't have pain here. We're not going to pretend that you don't have the pain. We're just going to use, together with that, we're going to flip that pain into purpose. Okay. Now, if you go back here, instead of improving, you're creating pressure, no longer pressure. Now, pain, that pain is being translated. Instead of translating pain to pressure, we're moving that pain into, we're flipping it into purpose. All right. Right. You need somewhere meaningful for the energy that kind of pain carry. You need that to go somewhere, and that's why you need purpose. Right. Purpose is not a distraction. It's more or less an expansion. Right. Yes, your marriage still matters, but your marriage crisis cannot become the only active department of your life, because what happens if you do that is it will choke life out of that marriage. Remember, marriage is a function of your own personal health, your mental health, your physical being, your well-being, your overall well-being, right? Your children still matters, right? Because those are responsibilities, are noble responsibilities as an adult, right? If you have children. And other things like your work, your finances, your health, your business, things that can collapse if you allow if you allow your state of marriage, your marriage status right now, it can actually collapse it. What about your friendships, your responsibilities outside of being a husband? All these kind of things can become healthy escapism while you continue to work on yourself, and then you give God a chance to work on your marriage. Okay, so your contribution, your life mission, and your purpose. All right. So instead of spending 3 hours drafting the perfect letter to your separated wife, letter to a separated wife, how you can express your love to them, spend appropriate time handling the actual logistical communication instead of doing all that kind of stuff, right? You go back to building your life, because your life is much more important. Why is it much more important? Well, it's a matter of priorities that actually have what we call the downstream effect, right? If you have a good life as an individual, that's sustainable. Sustainability will mean, while we're talking about sustainability at this point in time, let's move on to that next part in this revelation here. From purpose, you have self-discovery. If you don't discover self, nothing you build is going to be sustainable. Nothing you build is going to be sustainable. Your source of sustainability is still self. So even when I talk about higher self, that better be grounded in self. That needs to be grounded back to self. Like this needs to be connected. Okay? Very, very important. Confidence. Confidence is sexy. Everybody wants to be a part of it. For whatever weird reason, even when it comes off as arrogant, even when it comes off as prideful. Now, prideful, got to be careful with that, because pride is the number one thing that destroys marriages. Okay? But never mind that right now. We're trying to fix your marriage, right? So now, self-discovery, and instead of what do I need to change their mind so that they can come back to you, right? That question is, right? Instead, you're doing, who am I becoming? Who am I, right? What do I enjoy, right? Everything else is an extension of that. Now, it's easier said than done, right? Now you're dealing with your identity. You're able to get back to who am I and what am I becoming. It's more about who you are. Yes, you're going to have to consider the things you've gone through. But what do you do with that? You have to assign certain types of meanings to the events of life. For example, your marriage crashed is the reality, right? They checked out. They no longer want to be in a marriage with you, right? And you're making changes, then they still can't see it. Okay, let's get back. Why is it that, how are you measuring how they can't see it? Is it based on their reaction, their skepticism? Exactly. But is that really the way you should be measuring progress? Again, let's get back to how you should be measuring progress. The way you should be measuring progress is self-discovery. That's the first step in that. Okay? We need to be talking about your own strengths. Right? We need to talk about your own emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is not only practiced within a marriage, it's practiced with every human interaction. Any interaction with anything that basically operates off of emotions. That means every human being. right? So pride needs to be under control. Your ego has to be under control. Those are healthy characteristics of a human being, but if they're out of control, it destroys everything in its path. Do you understand? So the idea is not to eliminate pride. The idea is not to eliminate your expectations of a partner. The idea is to focus on the things you can control. That's what grounding helps you with. Focus on so many things you can, so many things, so many aspects of your life that you can control, and the rest you can't control. You leave that up for your higher self to worry about, because you are a person of value already, right? So from a place of purpose, now you are able to create value. What happens when you keep learning who you are? What happens when you keep developing your capacity, your capabilities, when you keep expanding your life, especially when it's the most difficult thing to do? Because I can tell you, so many people are going through depression after a marriage collapses, right? But if you're able to find yourself to this video, and you're able to find yourself to a place where you now operating from a place of purpose and you're expanding your life, what happens next? Right? If you keep doing that, you begin producing something people often try to demand. What is that? Value. Inside of value, you have self-respect, confidence, all these different nice things that is so hard to do, right? But all of that is from self-discovery to value. And no, we're not talking about moral values. No, contrary to the popular opinion that all you have to do is find a good person and you be a good person and all that kind of stuff. I don't talk to bad people anyway. Bad people don't end up on our videos, but sometimes if they don't pay attention, they end up in divorce court. Ouch, if they don't act quickly. Okay, so we're talking about experiential value. You're talking about something you're actually experiencing in real time, that you're actually still building, not the arrogantly composed moral value that you were given when I was raised in a good home, the one that you use to get defensive and to shame your partner and how it all got messy. We're not talking about that stuff. We're talking about the value that comes from a place of humility. You've been humbled and now you realize that you need to create value, right? We're not talking about the value that you suddenly think you have outside of results. I've changed, so I deserve better. Well, you deserve better. You desire better. You're not getting better. Then you need to go back, right? So being morally good does not create does not create a debt another adult has to repay with attraction. I'm sorry. That's not how life works. Okay. Value here means becoming increasingly valuable to your own experience of life. Yes, first, more alive, more engaging, more capable, capacity, right? We're talking about more emotionally sustainable, right? We're talking about more socially intelligent, meaning you are good by yourself. It's the reason why other people will want to be a part of you. But you have to start from self. More purposeful, as we've been talking about, right? We're talking about more curious. Speaking of curious, right? Not just you being curious now. Curiosity, when you produce that much value and people can see it and it shows, they get curious. Okay? They get curious. And it might take you time to actually observe that. So now, from value, you enter a phase we call curiosity and attraction. This is the result. This is the ultimate result here. I need to warn you about this one. Okay. This is not something you start looking out for. If you have to look out for it, it's not working. Okay. And you're not busy enough. That's usually what that means. Okay. And it's only going to get worse, because that energy that you're spending looking out for it, you just know that this is how it works from a principle standpoint. But you'll be so busy with everything, that process, that by the time it shows up, it's like, oh, we're already here. We're back here. Because it's that much effortless when it shows up. It shouldn't be something that you have to think so hardly about. Okay. All right, we're working. I have a lot of stuff I want to share with you guys. I do have a lot of stuff I would like to share with you. But let me just tell you like this. Why does it return to powerlessness? Well, it's not exactly returning to powerlessness. Again, losers are always delusional about life. They're looking for guarantees in life. There's no guarantees in life. Winners, they just build capacity. They need whatever life has to throw at them, they prepare themselves for it. So occasionally here and there, you might have other events in life that makes you feel powerless again. You know exactly what to do with that. Instead of going in the direction of having to prove yourself, you go to grounding first. You go to grounding first. Right? Your wife sometimes can still become warmer on Tuesday, your husband on Tuesday, and then by Friday it's kind of cold, right? It's uncertain. You don't know what's going on. You might have even gone back and done like a rewedding, maybe a renewal of marital vows and stuff. But this life is full of ups and downs, right? And it's not always just about you. Your husband can have an amazing weekend with you and still proceed with, separation paperwork. That's crazy, right? That happens too, right? You can have 6 peaceful weeks and then suddenly receive information that you didn't expect. It's unlikely, because the more you go through every successful navigation from powerlessness through curiosity and action, the more you do that, you build trust, you build safety, you build security. And everybody in this life wants to be under the covering of that level of security. And that's what you can count on. You can count on the process. Just plugging yourself in a process that you know for sure will continue to build the trust, safety, and security that you're looking for. Because again, it's about them feeling safe around you. That's what it comes at. That's why they like you. That's why you're their friends. That's why if you do that over and over, it becomes second nature, not just for you, but for the other person eventually. And then the losers will call you lucky. They say you're just lucky. Okay? They say you just happen to be lucky. You're lucky to find a good wife. Yeah, if you say so. But that's not reality. There were 8 billion people here. It's very simple. Some people know what they're doing. The rest of them would rather blame everything else but self. Okay? So the objective was never to permanently eliminate powerlessness. That never. The objective was to become increasingly capable of navigating anything, any curveball, any landmines that life has to throw at you. That's the objective for winners. Okay? And that's what makes this a cycle instead of a trick, instead of some magical wand where you just pray and everything go away. You're right. Work is a beautiful thing, but work becomes better, becomes effortless over time. The more results you get, the more trust, safety, security happens. Trust is not in the hands of the other person. It's in your hands. Okay? I hope that makes sense. I hope that's making sense. Okay? So now, understanding this, all of this that we're looking at on the board, this is a lot of stuff we covered here today. Understanding this is one thing. Living it when your wife tells you she still wants divorce after a beautiful weekend is another thing. Living it when your husband brings up something you did 5 years ago is another, right? They just can't see it, right? They can't see the change in you, right? Living it when you're separated, afraid, raising children, managing money, dealing with an affair, ouch, or wondering how much contact is appropriate between the two of you when implementing the stuff. All of that becomes very personal, right? So that's what coaching can help you with. And then you can apply these principles to the actual moving pieces of your marriage while keeping your dignity, discernment, and personal power intact. Okay? So if you need help with that, you need a system, you need skills, you need support system to navigate that. All you have to do is go to getmymarriageback.com/discovery and book a private discovery session. All right. Before we finish, right? Like I said, I was 10 years of self-development before I actually entered my own marriage collapse years back, right? It taught me something I didn't really understand until the collapse forced me to live it, right? I told you at the very beginning that I had already been studying, right? Just going through this stuff. And that made the crisis quite humbling because, you know, you know how you just thought you figured life out, right? Because knowing the concepts can make you think you've arrived, like you're that person, like it will never, right? Like you're that person that it will never happen to. And honestly, I wasn't that person. And sometimes I would take what I was learning and and basically weaponized it. Okay, I would teach, explain, analyze, help, fix, and when she gets fed up, she's like, "Stop being my therapist." I heard that a few times. She will say that, right? So we went through that cycle a bit before I figured something unique out. Something very unique. Again, applying this, I've given you everything today. I downloaded it to you, but applying this to your unique story is going to be an interesting journey to navigate because everybody's story is different. But give it a shot. But if you're looking for me to help you with that, just go to getmymarriageback.com/discovery. If today's lessons helped you, I'd appreciate if you would like this video, subscribe, and share with someone who needs it. I'll see you in the next video. Check out the next video. It should pop up on the screen right about now. And if you're looking for me, just come to getmymarriageback.com/discovery. Take care. God bless. Peace.
Are you fighting to save a marriage or a relationship, or simply avoiding to end up in a broken or toxic one?
We've been there and you're in the right place. You see, inside this book, right, you will find and you will discover the secret to save a broken marriage, and you will learn how to build and attract the marriage of your dream.